Okay. Ready to dive into a world where, well, let's just say love and money get kind of messy with the law.
Sounds intriguing.
It is. We're talking maintenance laws in India. Imagine going through a divorce and suddenly you're like, wait, how am I supposed to support myself now?
Right. That's where these laws come in, like a safety net, but with a whole lot of legal twists and turns.
Exactly. And to get into the nitty-gritty, we're taking a deep dive into a 2020 Indian Supreme Court judgment.
The Supreme Court. Always fascinating. What's the story behind this one?
Well, it's packed with legal details, but at its heart, it's a very human story. A husband is appealing a maintenance order, claiming he's unemployed and can't afford to pay.
Okay, I've seen that kind of situation before. What's the wife's side of the story?
She's arguing that he's hiding assets and basically dodging his responsibilities. It's a classic he said, she said situation.
And that's where the courts have to step in and sort things out, right? But before we get lost in the legal maze, let's take a step back.
Good point. Let's start with the basics. Why do these maintenance laws even exist in the first place?
It boils down to social justice. Think about it. A spouse, often the wife, might have put their career on hold to raise a family.
Right, making sacrifices for the family.
Exactly. And after a divorce, they could be in a vulnerable position, struggling to support themselves.
It's like saying, hey, just because a relationship ends, it doesn't mean one person should be left high and dry, financially speaking.
Precisely. And India's constitution actually recognizes this. Article 15.3 allows the state to make special provisions for women and children.
So it's built into the foundation of their legal system.
Yes. And Article 39 emphasizes the state's role in empowering women. There's a powerful quote from a judgment by Justice Krishna Iyer. The brooding presence of the constitutional empathy for the weaker sections like women and children must inform interpretation if it has to have social relevance.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. So it's not just about legal technicalities, it's about protecting people and ensuring fairness.
Absolutely. But here's where things get a bit complicated. India has multiple laws that deal with maintenance. It's like a legal jungle out there.
Okay, that sounds overwhelming. Which laws are we talking about here?
Well, we've got the Special Marriage Act, or SMA, the Hindu Marriage Act, known as the HMA.
Got it. Keep going.
The Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act, HMA for short, and even the Criminal Procedure Code, the CrPC, comes into play.
Okay, that's a lot of acronyms. Let's break them down one by one, starting with the SMA. What's so special about it?
Well, the SMA is designed for secular marriages for any two Indian citizens, no matter their religion. Sections 36 and 37 are the key ones when it comes to maintenance.
Okay, and what do those sections say?
Think of Section 36 as like a temporary financial bridge while the divorce is still happening.
So it's about providing support during the legal proceedings.
Exactly. It deals with alimony pendente lite. That's the fancy legal term for it.
Got it. So the court can order one spouse to support the other financially while they're sorting out the divorce. That's right. And then once the divorce is finalized, Section 37 kicks in. This one's about permanent alimony. Okay, so that's the long-term support arrangement.
Right, and it could be a lump sum payment or ongoing payments, depending on the situation.
Makes sense. Now, what about the HMA, the one specifically for Hindus? How is it different?
This is where things get interesting. Sections 24 and 25 of the HMA, the ones that cover maintenance, are actually gender neutral.
Oh, so it's not just about wives getting support from husbands?
Not at all. Either spouse can request financial support, regardless of who initiated the separation or divorce.
So the HMA acknowledges that husbands might need support too.
Absolutely. It recognizes that financial dependency can go both ways. Section 24 covers temporary support during the divorce proceedings, similar to the SMA. And then Section 25 handles the longer-term arrangements.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. Temporary support during the case, then longer-term arrangements once it's finalized. Yeah. But you also mentioned the HMA, the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act. What's that one all about?
HMA focuses on maintenance within Hindu families, even if there's no divorce happening. Section 18 is the key here.
And what does that say?
It lays out a Hindu wife's right to be maintained by her husband throughout her life, even if they're living separately.
Wait, so even if a couple isn't going through a divorce, a Hindu wife can still claim support?
Yes, but there are exceptions. For example, if the wife has been unfaithful or if she's converted to another religion, she could lose that right.
Interesting. So it's not an absolute right. There are conditions attached.
Exactly. It's all about balancing rights and responsibilities.
But earlier you mentioned the Criminal Procedure Code. What's a criminal law doing in the mix of all these family matters?
That's where Section 125 of the CrPC comes in. It's like a fast track option for getting maintenance.
Fast track. So it's quicker than going through the other legal routes.
Exactly. It's what's called a summary proceeding, designed to be faster and less formal.
So it's like an emergency button for immediate support.
You could say that. And importantly, Section 125 applies to everyone, regardless of their religion. It's a safety net that bypasses all the complexities of those personal laws.
So we've got the SMA, the HMA, the HAPA, and the CrPC, all dealing with maintenance in different ways. It sounds incredibly complicated.
It can be, yeah. Having so many laws covering the same issue, it's bound to lead to some confusion, right?
Right. And didn't you say there were issues with these laws overlapping?
You've hit the nail on the head. We've got all these different rules and guidelines, and naturally that leads to conflicting judgments sometimes. The high courts in India have had to deal with this a lot.
Can you give us an example? How does this play out in real cases?
Sure. Like in the case of RDBBD, the Delhi High Court had to clarify that if you're getting maintenance under the Domestic Violence Act, that's completely separate from anything you might get under the CrPC or the Hindu Marriage Act.
So it's not as simple as picking one law and going with it. You have to figure out how they all fit together.
Exactly. And the Supreme Court, they've been trying to bring some clarity to this whole mess, you know. They've emphasized that just because you're getting maintenance under one law, that doesn't automatically mean you can't get anything from another.
Okay, so you could potentially have multiple claims, but the courts are trying to prevent anyone from getting double the benefit.
That's the idea. They're trying to find a balanced approach and make sure things are fair. It's definitely a work in progress, this whole area of law.
It sounds like it. But let's shift gears a bit. Let's say a court decides, yes, maintenance is warranted in this case. How do they actually determine the amount? Is there like a set formula they use?
If only it were that easy. Unfortunately, there's no magic formula. Judges have to weigh a whole bunch of factors to make a fair decision.
So it's not just a matter of looking at someone's salary and dividing it in half.
Not at all. They look at the social and economic status of each person, their reasonable needs, why they're living separately, what assets they have, their income sources. It's like putting together a financial puzzle.
Wow, so it's a very thorough evaluation. What are some of the specific laws or guidelines that courts use in this process?
Well, Section 23 of the HMA, that lists some of those key factors we just talked about.
Okay, so that's one reference point.
Right. And then there's a helpful list from the Delhi High Court in the Farhat Hedge v. Samant Siraj Hegde case. They included things like the age and health of the spouses, how long the marriage lasted, and even how they behaved during the marriage.
Wow, so even how you act during the marriage can affect the outcome.
It can, especially if there's proof of, say, cruelty or adultery. They want to make sure these laws are being used fairly.
That makes sense. It's not just about blindly handing out money. They're looking at the whole context. What stood out to you as particularly significant in this judgment's approach to determining maintenance?
One thing that really struck me was how the judgment acknowledges the difficulties faced by women who might have put their careers on hold to raise a family.
Right. They might not have the same earning power as someone who's been working consistently.
Exactly. It specifically recognizes that it can be tough to get back into the workforce after a long break. The courts are looking at the sacrifices made and the hurdles to becoming financially independent.
So it's not just about their current income, but also their potential to earn in the future.
Exactly. They're looking at the bigger picture. And they also emphasize looking at things like inflation, you know, how prices are going up, and future needs, especially for the children.
Makes sense. So it's not just about getting by. It's about maintaining a certain standard of living.
Right. And the judgment even talks about this idea of a shared household, you know, how even if the wife doesn't legally own the property, she still has a right to live there.
So it's recognizing that a safe and secure place to live is a crucial part of this whole equation.
Absolutely. It's a much broader view of what support and well-being really mean.
Okay, I'm already learning so much. But let's move on to another question.
Yeah.
When does the actual responsibility to pay maintenance start? Is it from the day someone files for divorce or sees?
You'd think it would be a simple answer, wouldn't you?
I would.
But it's not. There are actually different opinions on this. Some courts think it should be from the date of application, others from the date of the court order, and some even go back to the date the summons is served. It's kind of a mess, really.
Wait, so much variation.
Yeah.
Why isn't there a clear rule on something so important?
Well, part of the problem is that some of these laws, like the HMA, they don't specifically say when it should start.
So it leaves room for interpretation, and then you get different practices in different courts.
Exactly. And that lack of clarity can create real hardship for the spouse who needs that support.
Right? They could be waiting and waiting with no financial help.
That's what the Supreme Court pointed out in the Shail Kumari Devi and Orsvi Krishna Bhagwan Pathak case.
What did they say?
They argued that to avoid that hardship, maintenance should start from the date of the application.
That seems like the most compassionate approach, considering how vulnerable someone might be in that situation.
Right. Timely justice is crucial, especially in cases like this. But, the law is always evolving, and it can be a challenge to make sure this is consistently applied in all courts.
I'm seeing a pattern here. The law is trying to catch up with the complexities of modern relationships, but there's always room for debate and improvement. Okay, one final question for this part. What happens if someone simply refuses to pay the court-ordered maintenance? What are the consequences?
That's where things get a bit more serious. The courts have several ways to make sure people comply with the orders.
So it's not just a slap on the wrist.
Definitely not. They can enforce the order through various means. For example, under both the HMA and the CrPC, there are procedures to enforce it. And that can even include imprisonment if someone repeatedly refuses to pay.
Wow, so there are real consequences for ignoring a court order.
You bet. And in the Kaushalya v. Mukesh Jain case, the Supreme Court even said that if someone isn't paying, the court can just strike down their defense altogether, basically saying you can't use the legal system to delay justice while you're also breaking its rules.
That's a strong message. But on top of that, didn't you say the Supreme Court introduced something new to try to prevent these kinds of issues?
Yes. They've made this thing called the affidavit of disclosure mandatory now for both sides in maintenance cases.
Okay, affidavit of disclosure. That sounds serious. What is it?
Think of it as a way to ensure financial honesty. Both spouses have to reveal everything about their finances, all their assets, liabilities, income sources, the whole shebang.
So no more hiding money or pretending to be broke.
That's the goal. The courts can then get a clear picture and make informed decisions. And to make sure everyone's on the same page, the judgment actually provides specific formats for this affidavit. They even have separate ones for people with agricultural income and those without. And get this, there's even a special format for Meghalaya.
Meghalaya. Why a special format for Meghalaya?
Well, Meghalaya has a unique matrilineal society. Their family structures and property ownership work differently. The affidavit format reflects that, so the legal process is sensitive to their regional customs.
Wow. Talk about attention to detail. So we've covered the why, the how much, the when, and the what if they don't pay. It's amazing how much ground we've covered already.
We have, and it all comes from just this one Supreme Court judgment. But before we move on, there's one more crucial takeaway that I think our listeners should remember.
I'm all ears. What is it?
This judgment, it really emphasizes that the purpose of maintenance isn't to punish anyone. It's not about revenge or settling scores.
It's about providing support and making sure someone can maintain a reasonable standard of living.
Exactly. Even though the law can be complicated, the core principle is about protecting those who might be vulnerable after a marriage or relationship ends.
Well said. Welcome back to our deep dive. We're untangling those maintenance laws in India, remember?
Still with us. Great. We've been digging into this 2020 Supreme Court judgment. It's like a window into how these laws work, in real life.
Totally. And speaking of real life situations, remember that case we were talking about earlier? The husband claiming he was unemployed, but the wife saying he was hiding assets. What happened there?
Oh, yeah, that one. Well, the Supreme Court, they weren't convinced by the husband's story. They took a closer look and basically said, nope, we don't believe you.
So they saw through his act.
Pretty much. They upheld the original maintenance order based on the evidence. They even increased the amount he had to pay. They took into account the wife's needs and, what he could actually afford.
Wow. So the lesson is clear. Don't try to fool the courts.
Honesty is the best policy, especially when it comes to finances.
Truth. But this whole discussion makes me wonder, do these laws, even with all their complexities, actually achieve what they set out to do? That whole social justice thing. Are they truly effective in protecting vulnerable spouses?
The $1 million question. It's tricky. They definitely provide a framework, right? But how effective they are really depends on a few things. It's like a three-legged stool. You need consistent application by the courts.
Okay, one leg.
You need efficient enforcement so people actually follow the orders.
2 legs. What's the third?
And this is crucial awareness among the very people who need protection. They need to know their rights.
So it's not just about having laws on paper. It's about making sure they're actually working in the real world.
Exactly. And, one of the biggest challenges is just the sheer number of cases, the backlog in the courts.
Right. Justice delayed is justice denied, as they say.
Especially when someone's struggling financially, every delay can feel like a mountain.
Absolutely. So what can be done to speed things up?
Well, that's where interim maintenance is so important. It's like a temporary lifeline while the case is still going on. The judgment we're looking at, it really stresses that courts need to prioritize these interim orders so people aren't left hanging.
So it's like a quick fix to provide some relief while they wait for the final decision.
Exactly. It's like financial first aid.
Love that analogy. But it's not just about the money, right? There's also that whole issue of the shared household.
Oh, right. That's another important form of protection. Imagine you might not legally own the property, but you have a right to live there.
So it prevents someone from being kicked out and becoming homeless.
Exactly. The law is saying, look, you need a safe and stable place to live, especially during a tough time like this.
It's about both financial and physical security. But as we're talking about these laws, it makes me realize maintenance isn't just a one-time thing, right? Life happens, things change. What about modifying those existing orders?
You're right. Life is rarely static. Luckily, the law gets that. It allows for changes to be made if there's a significant change in circumstances. Both the Hindu Marriage Act and the Special Marriage Act have provisions for that.
So it's not a case of set it and forget it. It can adapt as needed.
Exactly. That change in circumstances, it could be anything. A job loss, a big jump in income, someone remarries, a child grows up, all sorts of things.
So the law tries to stay flexible and keep up with people's lives.
It has to. I mean, think about job loss. If the person paying maintenance suddenly loses their job, it's only fair that they can ask the court to reduce the amount.
Right. Or on the flip side, if the person receiving support starts making a lot more money, the other person might say, hey, maybe I don't need to pay as much anymore.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, considering everyone's situation. And what about the kids? Their needs are constantly changing, right?
Oh, yeah. Kids are expensive.
Tell me about it. As they get older, their expenses go up. Education, healthcare, activities, all of that. And the court can adjust the order to make sure those costs are covered. Like, let's say a child needs braces or extra tutoring or even special medical care. The payments can be modified to help with that.
So it's not just about maintaining a lifestyle. It's also about making sure the children have what they need as they grow.
Absolutely. And of course, as they become adults and can support themselves, the payments would naturally decrease or stop.
Makes sense. But are finances the only thing courts look at when deciding whether to change an order? Do other things come into play?
Well, money is a biggie, but it's not the only factor. Think about remarriage, for instance. That's a major life change. If the person receiving maintenance gets remarried and their new spouse can support them, the court might say, okay, we're going to change or even stop the previous order.
So it's not about punishing someone for moving on with their life. It's recognizing that their financial situation is different now.
Exactly. And let's not forget, the conduct of both parties matters too. If the person getting maintenance is doing things the court sees as irresponsible, that could affect their request for a change.
So it's not just about proving financial need. It's also about showing that you're being responsible and trying to become self-sufficient.
Right. These laws, they're meant to provide support, not to create dependency. It's a two-way street.
This whole discussion is so insightful. It's clear these laws are well-intentioned, but there are always these challenges and gray areas.
Always. That's why it's so important for people to know their rights, what they're entitled to, what their obligations are. Knowledge is power in these situations.
I couldn't agree more. But let's get back to that affidavit of disclosure for a minute. That seems like a real game changer, forcing everyone to be upfront about their finances.
It has the potential to be, for sure. No more hiding money, no more underreporting income. Everything's out in the open.
It's like shining a light on those financial secrets.
Exactly. And remember those different formats for the affidavit. It just shows how much thought went into this, making sure things are consistent and clear.
I was especially intrigued by the one for Meghalaya, with its unique focus on family roles.
Right. It's sensitive to their culture and traditions. But let's be real for a second. Do you think this affidavit of disclosure is foolproof? I mean, are there still ways people might try to get around it?
That's a great question. What do you think?
Well, no system is perfect, is it? There's always someone who'll try to bend the rules. Some might try to manipulate the information, maybe undervalue their assets.
So it's up to the courts to be vigilant, to catch those who are trying to game the system.
Exactly. Lawyers and judges, they need to scrutinize those affidavits carefully, look for inconsistencies, use their expertise to spot any deception.
Sounds like a never-ending cat and mouse game.
You could say that. But this affidavit, it's a powerful tool. It sends a message, we're watching, so be honest.
It's about deterrence, setting the expectation that playing fair is the only option. But, sometimes I wonder, all these legal battles, they can be so draining, especially for families. Is there a growing trend towards using other methods to resolve these disputes? Like mediation, maybe? Finding solutions outside of a courtroom?
That's a great point. Mediation and other ways of resolving disputes outside of court, they're definitely becoming more popular.
Why do you think that is?
Well, they offer a less combative approach, It's more about collaboration, working together to find a solution. And that can be really valuable in family matters.
So not about winning or losing, it's about finding something that works for everyone.
Exactly. Mediation, it gives people more control over the outcome, which can lead to more sustainable solutions that everyone can live with.
And I bet it's better for the relationships too, especially if there are children involved.
Absolutely. It can help preserve those family bonds, which is so important for everyone's well-being. It's about minimizing conflict and putting the kids first.
It sounds much healthier than a drawn-out court battle where everyone ends up feeling resentful.
It can be. But mediation's not a magic bullet. It takes both sides being willing to compromise, to genuinely want to find solutions. If one side's just digging in their heels and refusing to budge, it's not going to work.
So it's not a guaranteed success, but it's a valuable option.
Right. And the courts in India, they're starting to recognize the value of this. Some courts actually encourage or even require mediation before going to trial, especially in family cases.
It sounds like a positive shift, moving to a more peaceful way of handling these disputes.
I think so. It shows a recognition that sometimes you need more than just a judge's ruling to truly resolve things, especially in families. It's about healing, finding a way forward that works for everyone in the long run.
This whole deep dive has been a roller coaster. We've gotten from the big picture of these laws to the nitty-gritty details of how they actually play out in people's lives.
We've covered a lot, that's for sure. But it's important to remember this area of law is always changing. Staying informed is key. And, sometimes getting expert legal advice is the best way to go.
It's like we've given our listener a map and compass to navigate this legal terrain. But before we wrap up this part, any final thoughts on this particular Supreme Court judgment? What might it mean for future cases?
Well, I think this judgment, it sets a strong precedent with its focus on transparency, fairness, and making sure the dependent spouse is protected. That affidavit of disclosure, that's a big deal.
No more hiding those financial skeletons in the closet.
Exactly. And remember how the judgment talks about the challenges faced by women who've been out of the workforce and considering the long-term needs of children. All of that is important. It's shaping how these laws are understood and applied.
So this isn't just a single case. It's a potential turning point in how these laws are enforced.
I think so. It shows a willingness to adapt, to keep up with the times, and make sure these laws are actually doing what they're supposed to do, protect people and ensure justice.
Well said. This has been an incredible conversation. But before we leave our listener with all this legal knowledge to ponder, one final thought. If the Supreme Court wants things to be more transparent and decisions to be made faster, shouldn't there be stricter deadlines for the courts themselves? To prevent even more hardship caused by those delays?
Ooh, that's a good question. You're highlighting a tricky balance, right? How do you make sure the legal process is thorough but also efficient? How do you prevent those delays from adding to the burden?
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure.
It is, and it's a conversation that needs to happen. How do we make the legal system more responsive, more efficient, without sacrificing fairness?
It's about finding that sweet spot between thoroughness and speed.
Exactly. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge worth tackling.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into maintenance laws in India. Remember, we've been exploring this whole world of how the law tries to protect people financially after a relationship ends.
It's been quite a journey through the legal system, hasn't it?
It has. We've talked about the laws themselves, real-life cases, and all those challenges of making sure things are fair. But, with any legal system, there are always those tricky questions, those gray areas that pop up.
Oh, absolutely. The law is complex, and life is even more so.
Exactly. And one of those areas that always gets me thinking is, how do they actually define sufficient means when it comes to maintenance? Like, how do the courts decide if someone has enough money to pay? It's a bit like, how long is a piece of string?
It's not a simple answer, that's for sure. It's not as easy as just looking at someone's salary and saying, yep, they can afford it.
So there's more to it than just a paycheck.
Way more. Courts consider all sorts of things. Salary, of course, but also things like business profits, investments, rental income, even inheritances and gifts. They try to get a complete picture of someone's financial situation.
Like a financial detective investigation, huh?
Kind of. And remember, what's considered sufficient means isn't the same for everyone. It depends on the needs of the person asking for maintenance and, what kind of lifestyle they had during the marriage.
So a CEO with millions in the bank would be held to a different standard than, say, someone working a regular job.
Right. The idea is to be fair and reasonable, taking everyone's circumstances into account. The law wants to make sure the person receiving maintenance can at least maintain a similar standard of living to what they were used to.
It's about preventing a huge drop in someone's quality of life, especially if they made sacrifices, like giving up their career for the family.
Exactly. But at the same time, the courts also consider the pair's expenses and responsibilities. It's not about bankrupting one person to support the other. It's about finding a balance.
Striking that balance, huh?
Always. And that's where that affidavit of disclosure we talked about earlier, that becomes so important.
Right. All the cards on the table, full transparency.
Exactly. It makes it much harder to hide assets or underreport income. And if the court finds out someone's been dishonest, well, there can be serious consequences.
Honesty is the best policy, especially in legal matters.
Always. But let's move on to another aspect of this whole maintenance thing. How long do the payments actually last? Is it forever? Or are there situations where they can be stopped or changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is it like a lifetime sentence?
Not necessarily. The length of time those payments continue, it really depends. The length of the marriage is a factor. So is the age and health of the person receiving support. Their ability to earn their own living also comes into play. And even how both people behaved during the marriage can have an impact.
So a short marriage might lead to a different arrangement than a long one.
You got it. Sometimes maintenance might be for a specific time period, enough to help someone get back on their feet financially. Other times it might be a longer-term arrangement, especially if someone is older or has health problems or just faces big challenges in supporting themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. What about if the person getting maintenance remarries? Does that automatically mean the payments stop?
Remarriage is definitely something the courts consider. If the new spouse can provide financial support, the old maintenance order might be changed or even stopped altogether. The thinking is, well, their financial needs are being met now by their new partner.
It's not about saying you can't find love again. It's about recognizing that the situation has changed.
Exactly. But, each case is unique. The courts have the power to look at all the details and make a decision that's fair and just for everyone involved.
It's all about adapting to those individual circumstances, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is. Life throws curveballs, things happen, and the system needs to be flexible enough to adjust. And that's why the law allows for those changes we talked about earlier, like a significant change in income, a health crisis, or even changes in a child's needs.
It's not a rigid one-size-fits-all situation.
Definitely not. This whole deep dive, it's been a real eye-opener, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. So much to think about. But, as we wrap things up, I can't help but wonder, what's the future of these maintenance laws? Any trends on the horizon? Any areas where they might need to be updated or, get a bit of a makeover?
Great question. The law, it never stands still, and technology, that's playing a bigger role these days. We might see systems where those maintenance payments are automated.
Automated. So like taking the human element out of it.
In a way, yeah. It could make everything smoother, more efficient, less chance of delays or disagreements over payment.
And probably easier to enforce too, right? No more playing games.
Right. Technology can also help track people's income and assets more accurately, so it's harder to hide anything. More transparency.
Sounds like a win-win. Easier for everyone and more accountability built in.
Exactly. And another trend, we might see more prenuptial agreements. Those agreements couples make about finances before they get married.
Right. Having those open and honest conversations about money right from the start.
Exactly. They're still pretty new in India, but they're becoming more common, especially with younger couples who want to be clear about their expectations and, maybe avoid some conflicts down the road.
It's about communication, right? Being upfront about money and responsibility.
Absolutely. And it's not just about protecting assets. assets. It's about making sure both partners understand what their rights and responsibilities are when it comes to finances. That can prevent a lot of misunderstandings later on.
It's a more mature, proactive approach to relationships instead of waiting for things to go wrong and then fighting about it in court.
I agree. And society's changing too, right? More and more women are working, contributing to the family finances. That's shifting the whole conversation around maintenance.
In what way? What kind of changes are you seeing?
Well, we're seeing a move away from that traditional idea that only the wife gets support. The idea of mutual support, where both spouses might contribute to each other based on their earning power, that's gaining traction.
So it's less about gender roles, more about fairness and recognizing how relationships work today.
Exactly. And the courts, they're reflecting this in their decisions. There have been cases where husbands who are financially dependent on their wives have been awarded maintenance.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It is. It shows these laws aren't about favoring one gender over another. It's about making sure